This is the part 3 of the lecture about composting. So in this phase, or in this lecture, I will explain the process of composting, what happened, which are the phases that it passes, and which are the indicators of a stable, mature compost and quality compost. In this part, so in the part 3, I wanted to show you with a pointer. So in this part of the lecture, so in the part 3, the lecture dealing with composting, we'll speak about composting process and composting testing. The other question is composting process. So here I want to present and explain how it is the composting process. The composting process, starting, I'll try to show you with a pointer. Okay. So the process is organic wastes taking oxygen and humidity, which will serve in fact for the microorganism activity, which will transform it in compost and will produce water, carbon dioxide, heat and ammonium during the process of composting. Organic waste. Organic waste can be, and it is good to have a good ratio between rich materials with lignin and cellulose, and the other materials that has starch, sugars, proteins, amino acids, chlorophyll, etc. The microorganisms that plays an important role in the process of composting, there are bacteria, and they are major players in the process of decomposure, fungi or fungi, and actinomycetes. I said that, or as you see in this image, the final result or the final output of the composting process is the compost, and it has to be matured compost. We understand what is the mature compost. The mature compost has humic substances and inorganic nutrients like nitrates, ammonium, and phosphates. Humic substances are grouped in two main groups, which are called humic acids, and the second group is fulvic acids. I want to remind you that composting is important to be an aerobic process, and it is important to understand that it is. I mentioned in the previous slide the materials that are used for composting, or the substances and materials that are part of them. Now you have a list here. The materials can be animal manure, post-harvest agriculture waste, or called farm waste, industrial byproducts, for example, brewery residues, food residues from cheese producing, straw, leaves, family restaurant food waste, so can be waste from families, but not only from families, even from restaurants. And in this case of restaurants, we can have higher quantities. Yard grass, sawdust, sewage sludge. However, remember that it is not allowed in organic agriculture. This is the sewage sludge. Papers, domestic, urban waste, 20 to 50 of them, however, that are not again allowed to use in organic agriculture. Tree branches, pruning debris, etc. So different materials can have organic matter, which can be of animal um, or plant origin. Uh, Here are some indications to take in account when we want to prepare composting in order to have a good um, compost or a good quality compost. So it is important the carbon and nitrogen ratio. It has to be between 20 and 40. And the best range is 25-30. Carbon to phosphate ratio has to be lower than 200. Moisture content has to be in the interval 45 to 65, but the best one is between 55 and 65. Oxygen concentration, it is better to be greater than 50% and much better when it is greater than um, again uh, so much better when it is much greater than 15%. pH between 5.5 and 9, and the best range is between 6.5 to till 8. Bulk density um, can be, or it's acceptable or reasonable to be in the range between 400 till 800 kilogram per cubic meter, and the best or preferred range is between 500 and 650 kilograms for cubic meter. Free space or pores greater than 25%, and it is better when it is much greater than 25%. Content of different composting materials. This is total against the biodegradable carbon and estimated carbon nitrogen ratio. Here you have the link, and if you see the ratio, for example, newsprint, the percentage of carbon is 39%, and a carbon nitrogen ratio is 115. With straw, so one by one you can see, for example, poultry manure has the percentage of carbon 43%, and carbon and nitrogen ratio is 10. Regarding biodegradable part, so here was the total part, and here we have the part that can be biodegraded, and here we have the percentage of lignin, percentage of cell wall, and percentage of nitrogen. I wanted to explain here, in fact, in more detail the composite phases. In the previous slide, I showed schematically how it was the composting process, and with a focus with the elements that were taking part in it. However, the composting is a process, is not a very short process. It passed through different phases, and here I want to mention these phases with the first phase called initial phase or mesophilic phase, which is short, it's not too long, it is 1 to 3 days, and during this phase the sugars are decomposed, starch and proteins. It is done by bacteria, so the main players are bacteria in this phase, so in the mesophilic phase. Then come the second phase, the thermophilic phase, which is characterized by the composition of fats, hemicellulose, cellulose, and in this phase we have high temperatures which is sometimes still 70 degree, but mostly it is 65, 67. The microorganisms are called thermophilic microorganisms because they support high temperatures. This is longer as phase. It takes days, weeks, even months. The oxygen, like in air, it is 21%. When it is reduced 10%, it is important to do ventilation, to do turning of the compost. The cooling phase is this here, cooling phase. It is has consumed easy degrading substances. It happens degradation of lignin and it is characterized by lower temperatures than the other previous phases. The organisms that play the most important role in this phase, there are fungi and microorganisms like macroorganisms like earthworms and soil bugs, which bring the coarser elements to humans, which then come back. The fourth phase is curing phase or aging of the compost or maturing stage. It is long or it is lasting from 3 to 6 months till 1 year. The result of it is stability of the compost. We have in this phase recolonization with microorganisms. It happens the hygienization of the compost. We have a lower pathogen load and it happens the degradation of phytotoxic substances in this phase. That's why it is called curing phase. Here again we have an image showing the curve that is following the decomposition process and the temperature. So here you have the temperature and here you see which phase. So mesophilic stage or the initial phase, the second phase, which is a thermophilic stage, because here there are microorganisms that support the high temperature, cooling phase and maturing phase or curing phase. You see here the pH too, how it's changed the temperature and how the pH changed. So from this level, the pH goes to this level. It is important in order to improve the quality of compost and the process of compost. It is advisable to use inoculum with microorganisms during thermophilic phase. Use can be use of integrators sorry for lapsus. So integrators such as natural rock minerals of phosphate. So these have not to be put on the first phase because it is will impact the microorganism. This will make phosphorus soluble for plants in the soil. Another important tip is it is necessary to do ventilation or aeration of the compost heap for toxins in order to leave. So the toxins to leave and decrease of temperature when it rises near 70 degrees, because higher again it's not good. A compost recipe in backyard conditions. So here I'm giving can be different recipes. The most important thing is to remember and to fix the parameters that I explained in the previous slides about, for example, carbon and nitrogen ratio, humidity, pH, and so on. So one recipe is a simple recipe is grass clippings with 77% moisture, 45% carbon, and 2.4 nitrogen. What else? Leaves, which have 35% moisture, 50% carbon, and 0.75 nitrogen. Family food waste, 80% moisture, 42% carbon, and 5% nitrogen. The ratio of the materials needed to get 60% moisture and carbon and nitrogen of about 30 to 1 is about 46 kilogram of grass, 59 kilogram of leaves, and 38 kilogram of food waste. So this is the ratio, a good ratio that we can use to produce in the home condition, in the garden condition, a good compost. Here you have a photo of compost in different stages. And as you see, the quantity of compost time by time is reduced because we have different transformation processes and we have some losses in the air, which are normal during the preparation of compost. This is the link of this photo, of this image, which is used as a reference. Here you have a link of how to prepare compost in condition of small gardens. Compost test. Let's speak about compost tests. These tests are mainly to assess if the compost is mature, is finished, is ready, and for toxicity and so on. So we will see later in the next slide. In fact, there has been always the discussion about which are the best indicators to show if or to assess if the compost is good quality, has not phytotoxicity, and is mature, is stable. So the question has been, can be the sugar content? The sugar content cannot be, because sugar is consumed since the initial phase and composting process is still in the beginning. And we'll continue. So we are in the first phases of preparation of compost. The compost is not yet stable and has not the other characteristics that do it a good compost. So the sugar content cannot be an indicator. The question is, can be pH? pH is one indicator, however, not for all the case, because pH is stabilized since the 39th day at 7.5 in most of the cases. But again, the composting process is not finished, and it depends on different compost, because in different compost the pH is different. I'm presenting again the photo that I have introduced previously, just to remind you about temperature, about the pH, and how, let's say, which are the values of these parameters in different phases and different stages of compost production. So uh, let's think still about possible indicators of compost maturity. What else? Content in percentage of carbon to dry matter. It is not an indicator. The question is content in percentage of ash to dry matter. Again, it is not an indicator. Both of them, even after 77 days, are increasing. So since they're not stable, they cannot assess if the compost, or we cannot assess based on them if the compost is mature or not. More stabilized is ash content after 90 days. So the question is, can be carbon and nitrogen ratio? Yes, the carbon and nitrogen ratio can be an indicator for compost maturity. It is the first index taken into consideration before passing to other tests. So carbon and nitrogen ratio in the ratio of 15 to 1 is ideal, but it is acceptable till 25. So uh, in soils, for example, carbon and nitrogen ratio is 10. What else? A respiration index. A respiration index which is defined by respective regulation in different countries. And a phototoxicity test. About compost quality, how you can assess the quality of compost? It is assessed based on biological stability, what we assessed previously. So the carbon and nitrogen ratio and respiration index are a good indicator to show the biological stability. Environmental quality, which is based on phytotoxicity and content of heavy metals. Um, indicator three, basic agronomic parameters like electroconductivity, bulk density, and so on, and agronomic enhancement. There is a simple test for evaluation of compost quality named, and it is really very simple. It is called Solvita test. It is cheap and it is empirical. It is based on a volumetric analysis and non-waste. It measures CO2 and NH3 or ammonium. Here you have a link of Solvita test. I'm leaving some seconds in order you have the possibility to write it down. But even you can go with keywords to YouTube and ask or search for Solvita test. Okay, now I wanted to conclude this lecture. Just remember which are the phases in which, four phases in which passes the preparation of compost. I explained what does it mean, the stability of compost, which are the indicators that show that the compost is stable or is in the stability phases or is stabilized, is cured, and which are the indicators that show the quality of compost. I spoke about Solvita test, which is a simple empirical test that shows the stability and quality of the compost. I explained I gave to you a simple recipe of a compost that can be used in condition of families, backyard, or the small farms. So till the next time, I wish you good study and see you there.